Yes, it's John G. Sutton. Here we have Tales from the Jails. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about HMP Strangeways, around about 1979, 1980. I was allocated to be the officer in charge of legal visits. That's when solicitors come in to see their clients who are already in prison, or the police come to interview inmates. And on this particular date, uh, a police officer, a very senior police officer, came to interview one of the inmates in Strangeways, and it is the prisoner's right to request that a prison officer sit in on the visit. That's so that they can't be verbaled up. You know what I mean by verbaled up? So they can't have the police officer saying, "Yes, I went to interview him at Strangeways prison, and he told me that he committed the great train robbery." All right, yeah. So to prevent all that, they allow the inmate the choice to have a prison officer sit in on their visit with the police who want to interview them about whatever. So on this particular occasion, the inmate exercised his right and requested that the senior officer in charge of legal visits, in that case me, sit in on the visit between him and the officer. And it was in fact a police officer called Chief Superintendent Topping. No doubt if you've been watching your crime dramas on TV, you'll know that a chief superintendent is a relatively senior rank. Anyway, Chief Superintendent Topping sits down opposite this guy, and I'm just at the other end of the table, not really paying too much attention, just listening quietly, And he says to him, "No, I want you to tell me," to this prisoner. He said, "I want you to tell me what you know about Detective Inspector such and such a body." The inmate says, "Oh yeah, he's a right bent bastard. He's been taking money off such and such a thing. All right, yeah. So, doesn't mean anything to me, does it? I mean, I'm just sit there to make sure that the inmate's happy enough that he hasn't been verbaled up." And he asked him a few more questions about such and such a body, and then he said to this prisoner, he said, "I want you to tell me what you know about Detective Sergeant Sutton." And of course, I kind of woke up when I heard that name, because it just so happened that Detective Sergeant Sutton was my brother Martin. And the prisoner said to Detective Chief Superintendent Topping, "He's a straight copper. As far as I know, he hasn't. He's not into anything." But the problem was, for me, I mean, I was seriously compromised here. This is my brother. And here we have a very senior, or relatively senior, police officer dropping my brother's name in like a bait on a fishing line, yeah? To a convicted armed robber. And the visit came to an end, and nothing untoward transpired apart from the fact that Chief Superintendent Topping was fishing for information about my brother. So it came to dinner time, lunchtime, about 12:30, and I went out the prison and phoned up my brother, who was at the time a detective sergeant at Collyhurst. Yeah, that's a police station in Manchester, just near Cheetham Hill. Look it up. Anyway, so I phoned my brother up. I said, "Martin, I'm going to tell you something in strictest confidence. You mustn't use my name, because I am not, under the Official Secrets Act, allowed to report what I hear on legal visits or anything else. But I'm telling you that this man, this Chief Superintendent of Police, has been in the prison today, putting your name to an inmate, suggesting that he tell them about whether you're into corruption and all that." Martin said, "This is very serious indeed." I said, "It is serious, Martin, hence I'm ringing you up and telling you. I said, "But don't use my name, it's an offence. So, anyway, it would be about 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, the same day. I get a call, go to see the chief officer. I went to see the chief officer. He said, you and I are going to see the governor now. So the number one chief officer and I went in to see the governor, the number one governor, Norman Brown at the time. Norman Brown says to me, Mr. Sutton, are you aware that you've signed the Official Secrets Act? I said, absolutely. And of course, by this time I knew what the score was. I said, absolutely, I know. He said, so why, in breach of this, did you contact Detective Sergeant Sutton and tell him that his name had been put forward by this Chief Superintendent of Police? Why did you do it? I said, because it's my brother. I said, and my brother is, to the best of my knowledge, he isn't corrupt, and he was potentially being fitted up by this chief superintendent who was putting his name out there, hoping to get some information to proceed against my brother. Because Chief Superintendent Topping was the head of the, what do they call it, the Criminal Investigation Department unit that investigates police, complaints against the police. So Norman Brown says to me, "God, this is number one governor." He said, "Well, Mr. Sutton," he said, "you put me in a very strange position here." He said, "I'm going to suspend you from all duties pending further discussions with my seniors." He said, "and for the time being," he said, "you will be employed opening and closing the main gates." That's the gates to Strangeways jail. Seriously. He said, what have you got to say for yourself? I said, well, seriously, I said, if this was your brother and the police had come in dropping his name in with a view to actually getting information to prosecute him, what would you have done? He said, Mr. Sutton, I would have done exactly the same thing. He said, but this isn't my brother, this is your brother, and you are in breach of the Official Secrets Act. He said, and so for the immediate future, your duties will be limited to opening and closing the gates. And seriously, I spent something like 5 or 6 weeks doing nothing but opening and closing the gates, and I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. It was just mind numbing. So I asked to see the governor, and I said, in the event that you can't place me back on normal duties, I'm just going to walk because I can't take this anymore. I can't do that. No, Mr. Sutton, he said, anyway, so I'm glad you've come to see me. Resume normal duties in the morning. So that was it. I was back on normal duties. And shortly after that, I was appointed as the head of the records office. I believe I ran the records office for over 18 months. And I asked my brother, I said, Martin, why did you put my name up? I said, I asked you not to do it. He said, I couldn't do anything else. He said, they had to know who told me. He said, and obviously, Chief Superintendent Topping ain't stupid. He knows who was listening in, and it wasn't the prisoner that told you. So it was obviously the officer who was listening in. So they concluded that it was you. So that was it. 6 months, 6 weeks of opening and closing the gate. Yeah, strange, yeah. I want to tell you a little story now about Wormwood Scrubs. It was probably around about September, October of 1975, and there was an inmate imprisoned in Wormwood Scrubs, and the press called him the Soho Vampire. What he'd been doing is murdering prostitutes in Soho in London and supposedly drinking their blood. He's obviously insane, a madman, So it came Saturday afternoon, and they go to the films, or they did go to the films. Sea Wing went to the films. He had like a little shed, where they showed a movie in there on an old projector. And I got the duty of actually taking this Soho Vampire to watch the film. And I had to be handcuffed to him, handcuffed to this guy, So I'm handcuffed to the Soho vampire, and we all go in to watch the film, and sat down quite near the back actually. And this film came on. It was, I believe, it was called Tales from the Grave or something, or Beyond the Grave or something like that. You know, one of these Peter Cushing things, and little stories. You know, and one of the stories was about a man who gets lost in this town where there's nobody about until it goes dark. Yeah, and it's dark, and all the people in this town are, yes, folks, you guessed it, they're vampires. Yeah, and this guy who's lost in this town goes into this club or whatever it is, and they've got somebody hanging upside down from this thing dangling in the roof, chained up to the roof, and they've got like a tap into his neck, and they're opening it up and drinking his blood. Well, the maniac that was sat next to me, the Soho vampire, starts screaming, and he was really enjoying this, you know. I wasn't. I was being dragged all over the place by him. So I said, "You stop it, you know, you're out." He loved it, you know. I couldn't stop him, so I dragged him out. But three of us whipped him away and put him in a padded cell. Shortly after that, he was taken away off to the hospital unit. I assume that they properly sedated him, because that film had absolutely tipped him over the top. The Soho vampire. And I got hooked up to him. What fun it is being a jailer, yeah? I was working on C2 landing at the Scrubs, and it would be about 7:30 at night, and a new batch of inmates came in, and the senior officer in charge of the unit on that day said to me, "Be careful, one of the lads who's coming in is seriously emotionally disturbed." He said he just be aware of that. So he told me who it was. I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, apparently, when he was in police custody, and this police officer said something to him in the inside the police station, and this inmate had gone absolutely wild, picked up a huge one of the old typewriters, really heavy one, picked it up and threw it at the police officer, missed the police officer, and hit his own mother on the head, killing her outright." Said so. That happened this morning. Said, and he's in here this evening, you know. So be aware that he's emotionally distressed. So this guy came on, and I knew who he was because he'd given me his name and all that. And I'd found him a cell, and there was another officer with me at the time, and we tried to make it reasonable. I did anyway. Tried to get him a reasonable cell, you know, with somebody who was generally reasonably sane, you know. So gets it to this cell, and my colleague, who was somewhat less sympathetic, shall we say, than I was, says to him, "Ah, you," he says, "we know your type." Seriously. And this poor kid's just annihilated his own mother with a typewriter. Happy days, eh? Tales from the jail.